Okay, so really, really happy to be with you today on this project. So just to concur with Han, that this has been a very useful project that has fed already into policy making, and I'm sorry to have scared you so much at the kickoff meeting. I think today I would say it a bit more mildly, because we have to recognize the diversity, but it's important to push so that we also receive useful things and these recipes you were mentioning that can be taken by others afterwards, and that will be very useful for the long-term vision for rural areas. So that's what you wanted me to talk about today, rural urban in the EU's long-term vision for rural areas, and I'm going to try that. So first, the long-term vision for rural areas started 2 years ago when the president-elect at the time of the new European Commission, President von der Leyen, in July 2019, decided to put the rural areas again on the top of the political agenda. And these were the words that she used. She praised rural areas as being the fabric of our society and the heartbeat of our economy. She praised diversity herself, defining this diversity as one of the most remarkable features of Europe. And they said they are core. She said they are core of our identity and economic potential as well. So it was a bit the first time that the policymakers at such a high level used those words to describe rural areas. And the idea was really to have a debate with the whole of Europe on the future of rural areas and their place in society, the contribution they can make to our challenges and our future, really. So this has been done through a process, a 1-year process, so around early 2020, so in the midst of COVID as well. We started a 1-year process with 3 streams of work to develop this long-term vision for rural areas. The first and maybe most important, or equally important, but very important for us, was the public consultation and all the citizen engagement activities that took place, because we really wanted to grasp that diversity, yet to identify the common ground. So we are again with the same challenge there. And not to have a vision that would be developed fully from Brussels, but to have something that would come from the people themselves. And that was a public consultation of both rural and urban citizens. It was we're not only talking to rural people. Then there was a big stream of work on analysis, where we also looked at the results of Horizon 2020 projects, including Robust. And in the big staff working document, you may have seen that there's a specific chapter on integrated territorial development that looks at urban-rural linkages, but also at cross-border cooperation, macro-regional strategies, and all forms of territorial approaches, and what do they mean for rural areas. And we have picked up a number of elements from Robust for that chapter already. So that's why I say the project is not finished, but it is already quite quoted in policy. And finally, but importantly as well, there was a Foresight dimension, the long-term vision for rural areas as a time horizon of 2040. Why 2040? Because we're a bit midway from the Sustainable Development Goals in 2030, and our big objective to become the first climate neutral continent by 2050. Several scenarios have been developed that consider also rural-urban interdependencies as one of the drivers. So the result of that work has been published on 30th of June 2021, so 3 months ago. Basically, it's a series of documents, including a communication, which is a more political document, setting bringing it all together and showing the vision and our areas of work and the shared goals that we want to achieve for rural areas by 2040. Then there's a very large, long staff working document with a lot of, I would say, unprecedented analysis across a number of dimensions, including also the description of EU policies and the Foresight part. There is a synopsis report of the public consultation and citizen engagement activities, and there's a fact sheet just to give the glimpse of what's in there in 2 pages. So you have the link to all these documents there. If you have not read them yet, I encourage you to have a look, because it's been a very long time since the European Commission did something so substantial on rural areas. Before we talk about urban-rural linkages or relations, just useful to say, because we always say the urban-rural relations are more important for rural areas that are close to a city than for those that are remote. So a few figures there you see in this pie chart that represent the distribution of European municipalities, let's say, or local administrative units in Europe. That the green part on the left are what we consider as being rural areas, and the rural areas, so it's around 30%, and rural areas close to a city are a good 2/3 of these 30%. And so for the remote rural areas, it may be less significant as an interesting component, but we're still talking about 2/3 of the rural areas when we talk about those that are close to a city. Hence, the rural-urban linkages, and in that direction, are in that perspective are important to look at. So rural-urban in the analysis comes a lot in terms of gaps. Rural-urban gaps get measured to try to qualify the situation of rural people and communities and areas compared to urban. And there we highlight a number of gaps. The rural population tends to be older. There tends to be an out-migration of women and young people. The GDP per capita is lower. Access to services is lower. The infrastructures are weaker. Access to fast internet, especially next generation access internet, is lower, and there's a higher feeling of being overlooked, especially for the remote areas. If you look at the figures that are in the document, remote rural people feel left behind much more prominently than those that are close to a city, for example. But the analysis also looks at all the opportunities, and there we can see that there are a lot of opportunities for rural areas that are also opportunities for all citizens, because the rural areas have a vast potential for developments that are seen as increasingly important. First, they are the key for ecosystem services on which everyone depends. They're the place to develop the bio and circular and green economy, also on which everyone depends. Ecological and digital transitions can bring a lot of opportunities for rural people. There are also increasing demands from society, from these rural areas, more healthy food, recreational space, access to green spaces. And this has been much highlighted during the COVID crisis, where the perception of rural areas has changed, and the way people look at them has changed as well, because they became also a refuge and a place to go, and maybe a place to work and a place to live in the long term for some people. So we have both these dimensions. Now, if we look at the specific chapter on integrated territorial development in the staff working document, it recognizes that the places are connected and interdependent in many ways, with a big diversity of situations and of geographies in which these connections can take place. It recognizes as well, as I said, that urban-rural linkages are most relevant for rural areas close to cities, but there can be some more distant functional relations too. Can be around functional relations that are more ecological, like river basins, things like that, or around heritage, where the geography is a bit different, or around multi-locality living, so something that you have worked on in Robust, and has invited us to mention that fact also in the paper. There are some challenges listed around urban sprawl, gentrification, service provision, governance that are detailed in the paper, but you know much more. You're very knowledgeable about all this, so I don't dwell too much. And as well, opportunities for synergies that there again we took from the work of Robust, where you identified opportunities to develop synergies between rural and urban areas around better service provision, proximity relations, circularity, the green economy, culture and heritage. And also we identified opportunities for synergies around digital transformation that can act as a connector as well between rural and urban areas. What we identified also is a growing recognition of the importance of rural areas for urban areas. That came in particular from the work that the DG Regio and the Joint Research Center are doing on analyzing the sustainable urban development strategies with the new tool Stratboard that has been put together. And this is also encouraged in the way the sustainable urban development strategies are built. We have a handbook, for example, that recommends really to have a wider geographical approach, and we can see this is increasingly taken up, which is a positive sign. Also, for the partnerships that can develop between urban and rural communities, there can be different, as I said, geographies or reasons of scope. So it can be spatial, really looking at an area and what can be done better, or having a more thematic entrance, like your communities of practice on food or services or cultural heritage, or both. So it can be really very, very different. There are many different routes that can be taken. And some conditions for success were highlighted. And the key one is that we should have balanced and relations with as much as possible an equal voice. And we have seen in all your case studies as well that this is not always easy, because the capacities in rural municipalities are not necessarily as big to take part in these relations as they can be in their urban counterparts. But there are solutions too, and facilitation and support can be very important in achieving this balanced partnerships. And the balanced partnerships with equal voice aspect did not come only in the analysis, but also very much from the public consultation there. So if we look a bit at the public consultation now, so I just picked one question that we asked to the respondents, which was what components should the EU's long-term strategy and action plan for the future of rural areas include? And the three top ones were job creation, innovation, and entrepreneurship. So this focus on economy, unfortunately, is very, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, but it's very prominent. I mean, for rural people, the lack of job opportunities is still a very big problem, as are access to infrastructure and services and improving connectivity and digital solutions. But if you got down the list a bit, you have improving links between urban and rural areas as one of the top responses as well. 38% of respondents said that the EU long-term strategy should have this as one of its components. I also extracted some things that were said during the activities on what we call rural voices. So this was a stakeholder engagement package that was developed for people to hold their own workshops in their own areas, and more than 2,000 people participated. This was facilitated by the European Network for Rural Development. And I picked just some ideas from these rural voices, from what people said, that could be very useful in terms of rural-urban relations. So people propose to look into relocalizing production, having wider territorial planning approaches, so not only urban planning, but wider spatial planning, including urban and rural, to look into regional and community energy systems, to pay more attention to valuing regional identity, goods, and ecosystem services, and also to have policy incentives for young people and professionals to settle in the countryside. That's something that could be very well organized, also in terms of rural-urban partnerships. So we see some concrete ideas that came also from these consultation, and not only big general recommendations that tend to come from these consultations as well. A little word about Foresight. So the Foresight activity has been organized as a participatory Foresight with a thematic group of the European Network for Rural Development, a group of around 50 people, and the Joint Research Center facilitating and organizing the whole process and reporting on it as well. So 4 scenarios have been developed for 2040, and the two main drivers that have been identified as most uncertain and impactful to structure these scenarios were demography on one side, so the distribution of population. Are rural areas going to grow in terms of population or not? and the quality of multi-level governance. So it's quite interesting for you, I think, that the quality of multi-level governance with fragmented on the left and networked governance on the right, which was also a concept that came from the analysis that Robust has done, was picked up as one of the most uncertain and impactful drivers. So something that if done well or not so well can impact the future very much. And so we had these 4 scenarios developed. And if we looked at rural urban in these scenarios, they each have a component analyzed in terms of rural urban relationships. And in the scenarios where you have expanding rural areas but fragmented governance, multi-level governance, for example, you have very close links between rural and urban settlements, but there's a lot of competition because it's not managed properly. In the scenario with expanding rural areas but network governance, on the contrary, you have a lot of, really a rural renewal. So communities developing in the rural areas with their own life and developing a new lifestyle, and their rural relations become as important as rural urban. And if you go down to the bottom, where rural areas are shrinking, if multi-level governance is networked, then the scenario is called rural connections. So there we see the remaining population in rural areas structuring as rural hubs, and then the connections, but very well connected because of the quality of governance. And there you look at rural-urban connections, so between hubs, and there's a very good recognition of interdependence. And on the bottom left, on the contrary, rural specialization, you really have an urban-centric perspective where the remaining rural people are really here to cater for the needs of urban citizens, but are not recognized in their own interest, just as service providers to the rural areas. So these are not projections, they're just meant to trigger a debate on which route development could take and how to manage it in the different conditions. So very quickly, because I'm being too long, I see that. So the vision is arranged around 4 areas of work and 11 shared goals. So the areas of work are around stronger communities, connected rural communities, resilient and prosperous. Stronger is about empowerment, access to services, and social innovation. So very, very big element on innovation ecosystems for rural people. Connected is about improving both digital and physical connectivity. Resilience is about environmental resilience and social resilience as well. And prosperous is about economic diversification, including sustainable food production. And within the shared goals, there's a recognition, it's the second goal, so it's very high in the list, that by 2040, rural areas, we would like, that's the goal, that rural areas are engaged in multi-level governance, developing integrated strategies, benefiting from a series of things, including interdependencies between urban and rural areas. If we project that to a bit the work that has been done, and I try to have your communities of practice there on the left to see how it echoes to urban-rural relations and what urban-rural synergies could bring to these goals. And under stronger, for example, fostering an equitable participation of rural people in the governance of urban-rural relations could make rural areas stronger, considering the needs of rural and urban people on equal footing, improving service provision, making local innovation ecosystems fit for rural innovators as well, including social innovators and improving networks, as well as developing smart specialization strategies that really embrace the diversity of needs. So these are the things that we could do to make rural areas stronger. And on the connected front, I think mobility is really the top need that needs to be recognized, as well as the improvement of digital services. And in resilience and prosperity, it's a lot about energy communities, valuing products, services, and value chains through win-win strategies. And these are things on which we've been working as well. The European long-term vision for rural areas comes with a rural action plan, which are the series of actions to take at EU level, with 9 flagship initiatives that relate to the 4 areas of work as well. Very quickly, 3 that I want to point out. One on sustainable multimodal mobility for rural areas that is said should build on sustainable urban mobility initiatives. On energy as well, there's a flagship initiative for rural municipalities with a proposed stream with a covenant of mayors, which has also been very active for urban. And in the proposed EU mission on soil health and food, the idea is to set up living labs to enhance soil health, and there will be living labs in rural areas, but also in urban areas and forestry areas, so all types of soils. So this could bring some relations too. So you can see that it's popping in different actions. And last but not least, and I'll conclude on that, one of the important things that the revision introduces is it proposes to set up a rural pact, which will be a framework for interaction between all levels of governance and stakeholders on achieving this vision. So, and there the text is a lot about building synergies and complementarities and making all the different interventions work for rural people. And so that's, I think, in the process of setting up this rural pact, your work could be very useful, and your tools will be taken up, I'm sure, in this context. At least we expect it, and we look forward to your final tools in that front. Thank you very much, and I hand over the floor back to you. Thank you.